We're trying to have a tactical conversation about real-time reporting versus batch data and then report on top of that. Older companies that have been using the data for a long time typically have more of a batch processing. But businesses really now want real time. They want to know who bought what sandwich 5 minutes ago so they can take action on that. You just had a great comment that we should probably start with.
But I would want to start with the notion of real time and what real time means to those that are asking for it. Is real time, split second real time? Is real time, 5 seconds from now, 5 minutes from now? A lot of data and trying to make it real time involves eventual consistency and the idea of being able to say, here's where I created the data, here's where I made it available to the end consumer for for consumption, and what was the amount of time between making that happen? Again, seconds, minutes, hours, whatever.
Data consistency was the piece that you brought up, and I think that becomes real important when it comes to reporting. Users of the data will run a sales report. Well, if you're doing batch processing, did they run it before or after today's batch was done? If they did a week, do you have data in the system for the days of the week that you've gotten to, or do you hold the data out? And it becomes, people get used to it, and as you move to real time, what I've seen really where the problem comes up is businesses have, historical financials or sales days and batch processing. So they get daily updated, or they've gotten better and they do it a couple of times a day. And then they have more transactional data in real time. And users of the data struggle to match the two up and to figure out which data is actually right. And really, for me, from an infrastructure and operations side of things, the difference between batch and real time is cost. That typically you've done the batch processing because you need your idle systems at night to do the heavy lifting to take a year's worth or a month's worth of sales data and crunch it into here's my today data, or here's my trending data, or here's my snowflake star data combined together. And real time tends to be much more unstructured. Here's just my databases. Feel free to, report against.
Well, that's if you're taking the reporting view of it. I mean, if you're going to go a step further and actually take action real time. So consumers bought X of something, and in doing so, they depleted supplies, and that triggers the back end processes to fulfill and start shipping stuff around. I mean, that just makes your systems more complex, right? So, you've got the reporting aspects of it, but then the systems become more complex if they actually have to take action and trigger other business processes as a result of that transaction happening.
Right. I mean, that's a great example of a real action you take, because reporting, it's always hard to say that you're taking a lot from that by having a user get an email and read it, or go to a portal and read it. But fulfillment's great. If I've got 20 widgets in the system and I'm only doing a replenishment once a night, whenever that comes up, is my website going to show that I still have 20 of them on hand because I haven't completed that process?
Right.
Well, and you need to worry about, again, that eventual consistency at the time which you actually made the update, and show or reflect that new inventory amount. Because if another transaction sneaks in the middle and realizes
I sold 21 of them.
Right
now I have 20 on inventory.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the types of problems you have to answer.
Yeah, because there's a big difference between, to your point, in a reporting solution, maybe an hour or 2 hours is enough to report on. But if it's purchasing stuff like Amazon, for instance, I gotta believe that they've got to be in the seconds, right? Because when they sell out of something, they want people to know that there is no more to buy.
Yeah, I mean, all the orders I've done from them, I've never got a message that says, sorry, that wasn't available. You look right now, I've got one in stock, I can buy it, it's in my cart, it's mine. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really the gold standard in my mind of real time, is that the customers are seeing live data. And it could be the end users in finance reporting or in marketing, wherever, getting the reports of what went on. Back at Potbelly's, I mean, we were not really taking actions, but you could see store sales data at corporate every 15 minutes. And in some respects, that was a burden because we had 56K circuits. I mean, you were pumping a lot of data back and forth, but it was really a good use case of, closer to real-time data. And I think that closer to data, people say real-time. Real-time is impossible because there's always a lag between the transaction happening in the transaction system or the ERP or wherever to the reporting side. Getting people to say near time's okay, less than a minute, less than 10 seconds.
Right.
Those are the business questions you've got to get answered.
Well, and like you just highlighted in your Potbelly story, you were okay with getting that information every 15 minutes versus every 5 minutes or even more sooner, right? And I think that's when talking real time, we all need a definition around what that means and what the reality is of getting the data in real time, and whether the cost involved, as you mentioned as well, and what really is required to support the use case or problem that they're trying to solve, right? Because they might think, well, I need it now. I need it as close to real time as possible. When in reality, maybe an hour later or even a day later is sufficient.
Right. You really got to figure out what questions you're trying to answer. Inventory, obviously, you want to be quicker.
Yeah.
Sales reporting probably doesn't matter in the middle of the lunch rush, but it's nice information to know. If it starts getting cold or it starts raining, or you want to see more macro things. But the other thing that you brought up in a previous video was the impact on your production systems versus your reporting systems. Typically, when you're doing real time, to get closer to real time, you've got to go get your data from your production systems. And if you're allowing a reporting user or a subsystem to call that in real time, now you're impacting your ability to take transactions.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, the more you impact. The more you do it, the more impact. Till you're impacting, you're making your transactions slower just so you can report about how fast you're making the transactions.
Right.
And that's a spiral that people grow into because they start with once a day, and then they make it every 6 hours, every hour, every 15 minutes, every 5 minutes. And they're firing that nightly process every 5 minutes, and suddenly you can't use your system.
Right. And I think one of the things that, in terms of steps in the right direction for that, and moving away from querying the transactional data directly, some of the read-only nodes and things that we've implemented in the past, right? You have your transaction, your read-write primary node, and then you have all just one-to-many read-only nodes that people can run queries against and have less of an impact against your transactional systems.
And I think that really does, the cloud really allows you to scale for that because you can spin up multiple read consistency, read-only nodes that you can keep consistent without having to have the hardware for terabytes and terabytes of data for all these extra copies. And, if your system's well architected enough with nice infrastructure as code, you can spin them down at night, spin them up as you need them, and expand your capacity for it.
Yep.
And allow different applications to bang away on those read-only nodes without impacting your primary transaction system.
Right. And I think that's a good start in order to try and get some of that, real-time data that people are looking for.
The use case to the batch, I think, does still exist because what you can do with batch is predefine the math. You can decide what staying with the Potbelly example, what a day part is. When does lunch start? When does lunch end? When does dinner start? When does dinner end? And force that data to your end users to report upon so they're not making decisions themselves. And I'm sure there's lots of examples like that. Or where you've got so complex math that you need the compute power, you need the compute time to give them the answer. It's hard to do that in real time.
Yeah, or you take that same batch process and do the math as part of the batch process and then make that data available so when the data itself is being queried, that math's already been done for you, and it's perceived quickness by the end user.
And you prevent, I think, some reporting problems by you're not allowing them, or you're making it easy for them to query the same data over and over. You're not making them predefine or come up with their own calculations for things.
Right. Yeah. Providing the data and making it simple and making it consistent and, through some, again, repeatable process, which I love to say, helps keep things on the same level. Everything's consistent and there's no change to the process, and the expectations are set and you know what you're getting.
How do you deal with a company that's maybe been around 30 or 40 years, like a power company or a phone company, where they've got all this massive data in a mainframe or, some sort of older system that needs the horsepower of those devices, that wants to be real time, but, due to existing infrastructure or, just sheer size of data, it's harder to do that. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, I think that, goes back to working on monolithic systems. You got to start carving pieces out. If you can get the data replicated out through change capture or through some other things, through a middleware system. Now it's not real time, but it's close. And then tell your story beyond that. Do I make read copies of that? Do I do data on top of that? Or does it have to be batch? Because that big mainframe only tells me sales data once a night because that's how it does it. You may have those limitations you can't work around. And it's awfully hard. I would think it would be awfully hard for the business for the reporting side of the business to drive a modernization of a mainframe. To go into a mainframe and make it do, every 5-minute calculations on sale, that would be a tough sell, because those things just aren't designed for that type of workload. But I mean, maybe you've got to move your source of truth for your sales data. I mean, you got to figure out what the business driver is.
But that's a foundational conversation, right? I mean, anytime
Absolutely.
you want to touch something like that, that's, might be 30 or 40 years old. You're talking about the foundation of the business, right? And the costs on that. How do you even get someone to even want to try to?
Well, the want is usually because the business wants some level of reporting. I mean, they want that data available. They want to be able to have, a self-service querying tool. They want to be able to have something, and you can't point a Power BI or a Tableau at a mainframe. I mean, there's just the data structure is going to be all wrong. So you've got to get the data out. You've got to get it transformed into a, tabular structure that those tools can reference, and probably have to do some normalization, because if you're coming out of a system that old, they've probably done a lot of things, like because of their data field limitations or things that just existed in the mainframe they coped with. Now you get it out in the world, you gotta normalize it. It's a big project, but I think those are all the things that you have to consider before you take on a reporting project like that. And really, the other thing that we've seen in systems like that is the source of truth. Suddenly you start thinking that, I've got this big data warehouse that I'm building and I'm updating it once a day or twice a day or 10 times a day. This is the source of truth. You got to remind people the source of truth is still back in that mainframe. The business hasn't migrated out of that. I think in data, it's important to know where your source of truth is.